Well, I'm going to just start with a couple of very basic questions, and then we'll kind of get on into other things here.
Okay, sure.
But first, we do like to ask you where you were born and when you were born, and just basic
Okay.
information.
I don't know if I want to tell you when. I'll tell you where.
But your name?
My name is Lee. My maiden name was McDaniel. Both of my parents were, well, the Scotch-Irish. So my mother had been named McCracken, McDaniel, you know, the whole bunch. And my husband was a German, so there was quite a lot of difference in that. But I grew up in Eufaula, Oklahoma, which is in the southeast corner of Oklahoma, close to the Arkansas border, actually, not very far. I went to school at Tahlequah, which is right on the border between Oklahoma and Arkansas.
You were talking about going to school in Tahlequah.
Yes, that's where I went to school. I didn't graduate from there. I had 2 years there. Actually, it was a junior college when I went there, so that's all I could take. Then I went to Greeley for the rest of my education. I finally got a master's degree in special education, of all things. So, and I have a secondary degree in social science and also in home economics. There weren't very many things that women could do at that point, if you remember. Of course, you weren't old enough, maybe. But nurses and, you know, homemakers or working with the county clerks of something was about the only thing women could do at that, when I was getting my graduate degree. So that's what I got it in. I wanted to be able to get a job.
Then you were tremendously well educated and had quite a bit of background. What happened that you wound up in the Army?
Well, I met a man in the Army. He was in Fort Sill, stationed there, and he came down to, I was going to summer school, and that was in Tahlequah too, and he had relatives in Arkansas right across the line. He came down and I had a couple of dates with him, and he said to me, they're starting a new women's group for the Army. And I said, well, I never heard of that. But most people hadn't, because I think it was just in the talking stage at that point. And I thought that might be fun. I had never been outside of Oklahoma, except to Arkansas, which was right next door. And I had hardly been out of the county, because, you know, a little country girl doesn't get to travel very far. All we had was a Model T, and I don't know that it would have gone that far. So I thought, I really would like to travel and see some of the world. I thought, that's a perfect way to do it. So I had taught summer school that summer in Lena, Oklahoma, which is a little tiny town. They only had 2 classrooms. The first classroom had kindergarten, first and second in it, and then the other one had fourth, fifth, and sixth. So I taught there. At that point, you could teach school if you passed a teaching certificate after 2 years of college. So that's what I had done. And I taught school for a year, and I kept thinking about what he had told me. And by that time, they had organized the WAC, and I had heard a little bit about it. So I got on a bus and went to Oklahoma City, where the recruitment office was, and signed up right then. And I never regretted it. It was a wonderful decision. I had a lovely time and learned a lot. And so that's the reason I got into the WACs.
Was this before the war?
This was, oh no, the war was, well, Pearl Harbor had already, so the war was going on, but it wasn't nearly, you know, to the peak at all. So I think it was just before, well, it was when the English Air Force was having such a hard time because Germany was just bombing the you-know-what out of England. And so that was about the time it was happening. Very few people, well, no one I knew at that point had gone into the Army. I had a brother who was 2 years younger, and he did go in eventually, but It was very new for the wax. That's the reason I think that I progressed as well, because there was not as much competition. When I went in, they had all of us take an IQ test. And so I scored quite nicely on the IQ test. And the company commander came in the next day and said, anyone who scored above 90 on the IQ test, and they had already passed the papers back, she said, we want to see you in the office. So several of us went down, and they said, we want you guys to go to officer training school. I mean, that's how easy it was to get in officer training school at that point. As I say, you know, the WAC had only been organized about 6 months, and they needed women to go overseas. So they took us right in. Well, most of them were clerical, I think. I really don't know how this all came out. I think the fact that I got into OC school early and, you know, got my bars, they needed officers to send overseas, I think, because they had women that wanted to go, but not enough officers to go with them. So I think that was how I got in so soon. I don't know, because I certainly had no special qualifications that most of them didn't have.
So you got to see the world a little bit.
Oh, I got to see a lot of it, and I did enjoy it. I spent almost 2 years in London, and I spent a little over 2 years in Paris. In London, one of the things that I'm real proud of myself for, I don't know why I should be, because anybody could have done it. They were starting a women's army group in London. You had to be a dual citizen of England and of the United States. But we had a lot of families over there, who had girls that were grown, who had grown up maybe even here and then been transferred over there. They wanted to get in. So they joined the British Women's Air Force because they had dual citizenship. And then I got the job of giving them basic training. So it was just a wonderful opportunity. I met Princess Elizabeth when she was, you know, she's about my age. So about that time she was about 20, 21. And she was a lovely lady. I didn't get to know her personally, of course, but I did meet her. She came and reviewed some of our parade grounds and stuff. And she was in the British women's group at that point. I don't remember what they called theirs, but it was real interesting to meet her. And she came to watch us parade, and then I went to watch their group parade. But those girls were absolutely wonderful to work with. They were well educated, you know, and had lived in London at least 2 or 3 years. So they had a sort of a dual personality. And I really enjoyed working with them. They were just great.
What rank were you at this point? You were actually training people.
I was a second lieutenant at that point. That was before I had been to officer school. But it was really a wonderful experience.
What was basic training, and what was the officers' training course really involved in at that time?
It depended on what kind of an officer you wanted to be. And at that point, I wanted to be a mess officer because I thought that was the only thing I was trained for. So that's what I did. My basic training in officer school was to be a mess officer. And so I was supposed to go and take over a mess hall right away. And actually I did in Paris for a while. That's the only place I was ever mess officer because I got promoted then. Actually, I got promoted to company commander pretty soon after I got over there because they didn't have any. Nobody was trained. See, I was one of the first group. So the man that had talked me into going sent me his gold officer bars when I made officer. So, of course, I wore those very, very nicely. But, yeah, it was a wonderful experience.
When you were in England, what kind of a setup did you have there?
Very different. We were down in the south of England. We were living in one wing of an old castle. It was a beautiful castle, but it was old, old, old. Some man, some earl had built it for his wife or his mother or somebody. And when the army took it over, they let the owner live in one wing of it. But it had these beautiful gardens all around, just absolutely gorgeous gardens. And they of course, the gardens were still there. They took everything out too, except the wall murals and fancy rugs and stuff, and put cots in. So our rooms, we still had the same kind of room, basically, 4 girls in a room and this sort of stuff. But it was a beautiful place. And we were there until we went overseas, after London. As I say, we stayed in London for almost a year. And that is where I trained the English girls to be officers, to be WACs, or they didn't call them WACs, whatever they called them. But yeah, it was beautiful. I like London. It's we got to go see Churchill's home and his childhood home, and we met Churchill, even though he wasn't prime minister right then, but he did be later. And but it was really a nice experience.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, being around Eisenhower's staff, did you see any of the other figures of the time, Generals Patton, Bradley, Montgomery, or Churchill?
I saw Churchill a couple of times, and General Bradley reviewed one of our drills one day, but I never got to talk to him. Now, we talked to Eisenhower a lot because, as I said, he was right there, and I knew his drivers real well. And I met the lady who was the wife of some earl that was real famous then, but I don't remember her name now. But we had a party at one time where they were there, and she was wearing the most gorgeous ring I have ever seen. I ate at the table with her. Well, in the first place, we had just gotten to England, and we were wearing winter uniforms here. No, we were wearing summer uniforms, and they were already into their winter uniforms. So they came in, I guess 2 days after we got there, someone came and said, they're having this reception and they'd like you to come. And I said, I don't have any clothes to wear. And so I borrowed from a woman that had already been there a skirt and of course at that point we didn't have zippers. Remember, they had the snaps on the side? So we were going through the lunch line that night before we had this big party, and I was walking along like this, and my skirt caught on the table, and the snaps came undone. And of course, I had my tray in my hand, so I was trying to hold my skirt up with one arm. So this woman came by and she said, "Let me help you." So she took it, and she was the one that had on this beautiful diamond ring. So we went to the same table to sit down. So I was embarrassed, and she was trying to make me feel better, I guess. So she was trying to be especially nice, and she said something about her ring, and I said, "Oh, that's a beautiful ring." She said, "Well, it's loose, and I'm afraid I'll lose it." She said, "Would you take it and keep it for me?" She had been drinking quite a bit, too. She said, "Would you take this ring and keep it for me until tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, will you come and pick it up tomorrow?" And she said, "Yes, I will." So I took it, put it in my pocket, and went on back home. And then about 2 hours later, one of the gendarmes came and said, "Do you have a ring that belongs to Lady?" And I said, "Well, if this is it, yes." And I showed it to him, and he said her husband was concerned about it because she came home, or he realized that she didn't have it. And she told him she gave it to someone that was at the parties. So they sent him over to get this ring back from me. And the girls were laughing at me. They said they thought you stole her ring. But then when her husband came and got it, and I told him, he said, "Oh, I know what happened." She told me, but she said, "I was concerned about it." And I think he was afraid, I might keep it, and I wouldn't blame him for being concerned, because it was a beautiful ring. But I gave it back to him, and everything turned out fine over that. Oh.
What was it like in England? You were there when a lot of bombing and things were going on.
That was a scary thing. I was never scared to death for myself. But I thought, if I have to write a letter to one of these girls' parents that they got killed, I don't know how in the world I'll do it. And we did have bomb shelters. So, but the trouble with buzz bombs is you never know where they're going to fall. You would hear them, and they sort of buzz, buzz, buzz right over your head. But when the engine went off, that's when they fell, because it was the amount of gasoline they had on board and so they might fall 20 miles from downtown, or they might fall anywhere. They did fall on the railway station there, and several little spots, and they weren't as big bombs as they did use later, but they would knock half a block out, but you never knew where they were going to fall. So there wasn't much point in trying to find a shelter. There really wasn't. They would put on the siren, to tell us that there was something on the way. But you didn't know if it was going to be there 5 minutes from now or half an hour from now, or if it was going to hit here or 10 miles away. So it wasn't, it was just very nerve-wracking. But as I say, the thing I was most scared about was that one of the girls would get hurt, because I couldn't imagine sending parents that kind of a letter. But they never did. Not a one was ever in. One was in the wreck later, but she wasn't close at the time it actually hit. So.
How many women did you have?
We had, there was 300 in the company, but then it was divided. I didn't have 300 until, about the second year I was an officer. As a second lieutenant, we had a couple of platoons, but not a whole group. So that wasn't so bad. But, and they slept 4 in a room, on cots, of course. And the only trouble after we got to Paris, we had a Negro girl come, and of course they didn't have very many Negroes in the service at that point. And I remember General Eisenhower's office was right next to ours in Paris. And he came over one day and he said to me, "I'm going to be assigning a Negro girl from South Carolina, I think it was, to your company. And I want you to be sure that there's no girl in this company that, says anything or is nasty in any way." And I said, "Oh, they won't do that." And so they did send a Negro girl, and she asked if she could have a separate room. I think she was a little bit scared. I don't blame her. I would have been scared too. And I said, "Well, let's make a deal. You stay in your single room for about a month, and then let's talk about it. And if you still want a single room, we probably can get it, but I'd really like you to room with the other girls." And she said, okay. And she had been there, less than a week, and she came to me and said, "Anytime you want to put me in with the other girls, I'm ready." Because those girls were so nice to her. Of course, they were from all over the States. They weren't all from the South. But I was really concerned about that, because at that point, there was a lot still in this country, as you probably know. And I did not want that to happen in my company, and it didn't. So I was real. But General Eisenhower probably would have skinned me and someone else alive if we hadn't been nice to her.
That was probably a pretty unusual arrangement at that time, because the rest of the Army was not integrated.
They weren't. I know it. It was very integrated. But there weren't very many Negro girls in the Army either, so I think, actually, she's the only one I met in England after we got to France. There were a few more in. Not in my company. She's the only girl I ever did have in my company. But there were a few more Negroes there in France, but not very many. I think the Negro women probably felt a little more uncomfortable even than the men did, because they were not sure that there wouldn't be. And I'm sure in some places that there would have been some bad feelings, but I don't think there ever were in mine.
Before D-Day, just what you and the girls under you were doing, how much were you aware of all the organization and the gathering of troops for D-Day?
We didn't know nearly as much as I would like to have known, but I'm sure we knew a lot more than most people did, because, as I say, we were working so close to them, and he never really told any secrets about it, but I knew that something was being planned real big. Oh, I knew something big was going to happen, but I had no idea what it was. I don't think Eisenhower and his staff did, but the girls never, I don't think they even knew for sure. They knew something big was coming, but I don't think they had any idea where it was all happening. I had no idea what time it was going to be. And I don't think the girls really, even the ones who worked in his office, as I say, they knew something big was coming. And it had been rumored that, we all knew that there was going to be one, but we just didn't know when. And so I had a pretty good idea when they asked some of these girls, they asked permission and then told me that they wanted these girls to go. And I thought, well, there's something big going on. And I knew that when he came, it would probably be down there somewhere, because the Germans were still on the other side of Paris, so he couldn't come too far any other way. So I wasn't really surprised, except at the exact date. And of course, I had no idea when that would be. I don't think even Eisenhower knew for sure, because he had to wait till everything was just right.
You had mentioned that
Even he didn't.
he didn't really even know what day, or initially, but when it got down to the point where they knew they were going the next day or two, were you aware that it was really starting to happen?
Yeah, I think so. I tried to pretend that I didn't. And I wasn't absolutely sure either. You never know, because depending on weather, it could have been that day or it could have been 2 weeks from then, because the weather's pretty erratic down in that part of the world. And they had to have some clear, fairly calm weather, or they never would have made it. So I knew something big was happening, and I knew it was going to be soon, but I didn't know when, of course. And I'm not sure he knew exactly what day, because, as I said, they had the orders all cut except for the day. And they had planned to go 2 days earlier, I think, and the weather was bad. So, yeah, I knew something was going on.
At this point, what was your company doing? What were the duties?
Oh, they were with the Signal Corps, and they sent and I remember that was before computers. So there was no way to get messages from one place to another except by telegraph, or because they didn't have telephone lines in most of those places either. So they ran the teletype machines. And before D-Day, they cut all the orders for the D-Day invasion, and the girls in my company did it. They worked, around the clock, 8-hour shifts, 3 8-hour shifts of different girls would go to work to cut the orders for that. And they didn't want to put the date on the orders, because if the weather was bad, that wouldn't work. So they would go down and cut the orders and leave the date blank. And then the next group of girls that came in, they were there to fill in the blank if that's what they needed. So that's the way they did it.
When it did start, was it just absolute chaos as far as all the work that had to be done and the messages that were coming in?
Not as chaotic as you might think. because, as I said, a lot of the work had been done, except for the actual date. I think most of Eisenhower's staff probably knew that within the 2-week period or whatever, that it was going to happen. But they just had to be sure that the seas were calm enough at that particular day that it could actually start then.
Did you get reports right away when D-Day happened as to what was actually going on?
Well, pretty much, because I went back right almost with the first load of girls. And by the time we got back to Paris, most of the Parisians even knew that they were on their way. Of course, they were worried that they'd be able to make it because there were a lot of things there to stop them. But there really wasn't that much between where they were and Paris itself, because the Germans had pulled back quite a way. But we didn't know that they might not come back down again, so that was the main thing. We were not only worried about the other boys getting there, but the fact that they didn't come back. So, and then the girls all stayed in England, where they cut the orders, and the rest of us met a lot of the troops on the beach in France. We took buses down because somebody had to be there to cut new orders and make new arrangements for them. So I went down with 2 platoons of my girls, and we spent the night, 2 nights on the beach, the only night I ever slept in a pup tent in the Army. We stayed 2 nights on the beach, and they had MPs all around us. One night an MP came and sort of knocked on the door of my tent, and he said, "Captain, I just want you to know that your girls are safe here, because there are Germans around, but we're guarding you, we're guarding you." And I said, "It's not you, the Germans I'm worried about. It's you guys parked around us here. You haven't seen a woman in months." They laughed. They thought that was so funny, but I giggled too, because I was really more disturbed about them at that point, because they hadn't seen a woman in a while, and these were American girls. But nothing happened. So we just stayed 2 nights. And then when the troops came in and were able to get, on the beach all right, then they took the troops where they belonged, and they took us and part of the troops back to Paris. So it really was a fun experience.
How long after D-Day was this that you were on the beach?
For this particular time?
Yeah.
It was D-Day. That's the reason we were there. Well, actually, I think it took them about 2 days, I guess, to all get over. So, because we were only on the beach 2 nights, and of course, the same bus that took the troops back to Paris took us with them. So, not in the same bus, but with them. So, yeah, that worked out pretty well. But it was really uncomfortable in other ways, because we were out there, with not very many arms around. And but nothing happened. The Frenchmen were nice to us too, so they were always very courteous.
How did you actually get on the beach?
That was what?
How did you get across the channel and to the beach?
Oh no, we were on the beach. Not the channel was here. They crossed the channel,
Right.
so we were on the edge of the channel, but not. I have been across on the channel though from there a couple of times, and it was rough. The channel is always rough because it's narrow and there's lots of bad weather. But I went across once in one of those little boats that I don't remember what they're called. Anyhow, this was not during the Army. This was after the Army was over. So, after the war was over. So, but the beach was scary. There were, it was. Well, there were Germans behind us and our own boys in front. But it really worked out well. And of course, they knew pretty much where we were was going to be safe. They wouldn't have put us there otherwise. But there were a bunch of cement bunkers up behind us, along the beach. But we were below them.
in the Signal Corps, at this point, what kind of messages are you getting? Are you getting reports from the front lines, the units in the fighting, and trying to get those back to headquarters?
It was mostly sort of SOS calls. You know, we're under heavy fire. Which direction do we go? What's the safe way? And now, actually, they had men too that were doing some of the servicing, and so they kept us as nearly as they could safe. But there were a few times when we didn't really feel that safe. But
How close to Paris were you where you were
I was
stationed?
in Paris the whole time,
What kind of an experience was that?
right off the Champs-Élysées, right down the street from the Arc de Triomphe. We were billeted in the Hotel California. Do you know Paris at all? The Charles sank. The Charles V is the biggest, fanciest hotel. That's where Eisenhower was staying. And we were right next door at the California Hotel. Beautiful big hotel that they had taken over, you know, from a hotel company. Had a wine cellar downstairs, and of course we didn't get to go down there very often, but it was, and they had left all the beautiful murals and stuff up. They took all the beds out, all the, you know, the fancy furniture, and put cots in. But other than that, it's a beautiful hotel. I just love it. In fact, I always go by there when I go back, but I don't go in because it's too expensive for me. But it's a beautiful hotel. And as I say, Eisenhower's staff was right next door in the other big hotel. So they were in the Sank Hotel, Charles V, and I was in the California right next door. I think it was, well, this was over Christmas when after the D-Day, and we were having a party, and the Red Cross was about 4 or 5 blocks from us in Paris. And of course, they always had boys in there for R&R. And we had called them and asked if they would like to send some of the boys over to us for a Christmas Eve party. And of course, they would love that. So I said, we don't have transportation, but you'd have to send them over. They said, well, we'll have to dim our lights. They had a thing they can put over the lights to dim it so that it shone down, I guess, instead of sort of up. I don't know. So we had some of these people, well, most of them, down in our basement. And the French had left this hotel in perfect shape. They had a big pool table down in the bottom, and lots of flowers and stuff around. They had cleared out the top, the bedrooms pretty well, but the basement they had left pretty much as it was. So we were down there for most of the party. Well, at 11 o'clock, they sent their trucks to pick up the boys to take them back. So we thought they were all gone, and about 12:30, I said to my first sergeant, maybe we should go downstairs and check to see that, you know, that it's all cleaned up and stuff, no cigarette butts or anything around. So we went downstairs, and here this sailor was laying on the pool table, passed out, drunk as a hoot owl, and he had his hands folded like this, and he was just as comfortable as you please on this pool table. I just nearly died. We both stood there and laughed, and she reached over and got some artificial lilies that was in a bowl and stuck them in his hand. And then we called the company back and said, okay, you can send your trucks over now. We did find one man that didn't get on the other one, and he needs to come home. So I think that's the reason they had called to tell us. So they came over to pick him up. And here he lay. And those guys just nearly passed out laughing. It was so funny. So they finally woke him up and got him out of there. I never will forget that. Oh, it was just hilarious. I'm sorry.
That's great. That's all right. We're absolutely always getting these kind of things on tape. See, these are things you don't find every day. With
With your role in the Signal Corps, did you have, you had to have some sort of a security clearance or something that was.
We all had to have security clearance, and I don't know where it came from. I have no idea who granted the security clearance, but I know we all had it. And I did have to sign a lot for the girls as they came in later, because they did all the pictures. In fact, I brought a bunch of pictures that the Signal Corps made of around the Battle of the Bulge, because they couldn't publish them. You know, the boys couldn't publish them, and they were so proud of them, but they didn't want to carry them all around with them. These were the men that took these pictures, and they brought over a stack of them. If you want to see some, I'll show you, but they brought over this whole stack of pictures, and I kept them. So, because as I said, you couldn't publish any kind of picture then. Well, later you could, and some were cleared, but the ones that weren't cleared are the ones that I have, so. Yeah, and I was real proud of them. But the boys didn't want to carry them around with them. And, of course, my girls didn't do any of the picture making because that wasn't their. They did the typing and, you know, took care of the book work. But they did. I had 3 girls that worked right in Eisenhower's office, and they just adored that man. They thought he was the greatest thing that ever walked. And I liked him, too. One time, remember the Stars and Stripes magazine? One time we got one. They sent one over to us. Of course, we always got one because the Stars and Stripes editing room was just across the hall from us. Actually, from my window, we were on the 2nd floor, my office was. From my window, I could knock on my window and someone over there could answer it. Just open their window and we could talk, because it wasn't really it was like a trail between the two. So one day there was a cartoon in the Stars and Stripes that we just got the biggest kick out of. So it was, what was the guy that they were always making fun of in the Stars and Stripes? You know the one I mean. Anyhow, it showed him in bed, and he obviously was having a hard time getting to sleep. Well, finally, he did wake up, and he jumped out of bed, and he looked down, and there was a big wet spot on the bed, and it was called Wet Dream. Well, the girls had laughed when they saw it, so my first sergeant cut it out of the paper and put it on the bulletin board, because a lot of the girls didn't read it. So this guy called from Ike's office, and he said, "Captain, Ike is coming over to your place. He wants to just talk to see some of you and see how things are going." And he said, "I'd hope you don't have that Stars and Stripes thing out," because he said he didn't want any woman to see that article. He was upset with it, that they had put it in. So I rushed out and I said, "Sergeant Andrzejczyk, get that off the bulletin board because Ike is coming over." So she quick got it off. And he came in and he said, "I hope that none of your girls saw that cartoon in the Stars and Stripes this morning." I said, "Oh, what was it about?" He said, "Well, I don't think your girls would like to see it." And I said, "Well, most of them are pretty broad-minded." He said, "Yeah, but this was bad." I never did tell him that we had taken it off the bulletin board. But I didn't have too much contact with him, but he was a gentleman in every way I ever saw him. I really was very fond of him. And so I really didn't like some of the things that was said about him and his driver after that. Because I met her too, and she was a matronly looking, I thought. I was really surprised and I'm not surprised that it happened, my gosh.
Later on, you mentioned getting messages when you were in Paris, the Battle of the Bulge, when that happened. Was there any kind of a sense of real worry about what was going to happen at that point?
Oh, yeah. There was a lot of worry at that point because we thought we might have to pull out of Paris and leave. They were close, and it was really scary, I thought. As I said, I never was so scared about myself, but I kept worrying about everybody else. And but we were we had to be back at our hotel room before dark every night. Wherever the girls were working, they had to be back there ready, and we had all of our shades drawn all the time, day and night almost, because we thought we'd forget to pull them down again. And a lot of times we didn't even use the lights, we used candles, because we thought, we don't want to be a visible target here if they do get back. And several times they were not too far away, even at that point. They left pretty soon after that, but it was scary. And I keep saying I wasn't so scared for myself. I think I had made up my mind that if I die, I asked for it. But I think I almost would have rather died than have to tell parents that their girls were dead. So I was, I felt lucky every morning when we woke up.
Did you have contact with any of at the time of the Battle of the Bulge, soldiers coming back into to Paris? And,
a few came back, but they were so tired at that point, and they went right to the Red Cross buildings, and some of them did come to our place for a couple of parties, but they were so fatigued and I think just sick of the whole thing. They weren't really as much fun to have around as you thought they might be. They weren't rambunctious at all like I had expected them to be. It was late and they were tired and they were ready to go home, and that's what they wanted to do. So it really wasn't much fun for a while there. At first it was just fun to have the soldiers come in and have a big party, and everybody had a few drinks and laughed and told stories and sang songs and danced. But no, after that was over, there was not very much enjoyment. You'd think they would be. Their part was over. They knew they were going to be coming home pretty soon. As I said, they were not rambunctious at all. They were very subdued, quiet, tired. Almost everybody was ready to get out of there and come back home at that point. Even I was ready. When that was over, I think basically everybody was just ready to go home, and it was about time, and everybody knew it, because everybody there had given up. The Frenchmen had said, it's over for us, and the English had about decided that too. So it was sort of a letdown, and everybody was ready to just call it a day and go home.
What was VE Day like in Paris?
Oh, you have never seen so much shouting and laughing and crying. There was a lot of crying too, and the Frenchmen went absolutely crazy. They were worse than we were. So I think the women were worse than the men. They always are, I guess. But when the soldiers would come in, they would jump up on the Jeep things and hug the boys and kiss them and wave their hands. Oh, it was fun. I got a little disgusted once in a while because, and some of them were drinking an awful lot, so they do drink a lot in Paris. So it was, I finally just went back to the hotel and said, I'm glad it's over. But that was, it was really nice.
And were you involved in any way when they had the surrender ceremonies, or were you still just back in Paris at that point?
I was gone by then, yeah. No, I had none of that. I guess they were pretty fancy, but I think everybody, though, it wasn't as much of a release and happy day as everybody thought it would be, because we were so tired of it, and I know I didn't feel like celebrating, even though it was a celebration day, but no, it was sort of a letdown in a lot of ways. So, but everybody reacted differently too. I think the Parisians were much happier than the rest of us because they wanted everybody out of there so they'd have their town back. I don't blame them.
How long did you stay in?
Well, till the war was over, I was in about 5.5 years, I think, altogether. 2 years in London and 2 in Paris, and then just a little bit. See, I wasn't here in the States for very long because I went over so soon. And after the war was over, I had gotten married after I came back to the States. I came back when my dad had a stroke, and so the Red Cross brought me home for that. He died, and they brought me home for that. And then the war was over, and there was really no reason for me to go back. In fact, they sent me a telegram and said that I should report to San Antonio, Texas, for the rest of my service. And there they wanted me to work with with the discharge people, so that the WACs and nurses coming home after the war would come there for their discharge. So I didn't get back to Paris at all. And I was sort of sorry I didn't get back, just to sort of say goodbye to things. But that's what happened.
What did you do after the war?
Well, I came home, and as I said, I got married. Pretty soon I had a baby, about 9 months later. And then I retired from everything except keeping house and being a mother for a while. And then I went back to teaching school after the kids were in kindergarten. And I was ready to settle down. I had wanted all this adventure and had felt like I never would get it. And I had had all the adventure at that point that I needed. Of course, that didn't always last. I was ready to go traveling again pretty soon. But
how did you meet your husband? Was he in the Army?
He was in the Army. I met him in Fort Des Moines. That's when I was in basic training. And he was in radio school there. And a friend of his had been dating a friend of mine. I hadn't met him. But they said, "We've got this man we want you to meet." So I said, fine. And I had already gotten that's when I had gotten my second lieutenant's. I'd finished my part of it there. I was already a second lieutenant, and he was a corporal. Well, at that point, an enlisted man couldn't date an officer. So we spent more time at the county fair, the fairgrounds in Des Moines, riding the merry-go-round and all those things, because that's the only place we could go out together, and to the swimming pool. So we would put our swimming pants on and go swimming or go to the fair every night. And it was fun, but it was a little disconcerting for both of us because he knew he shouldn't be dating me either. We both would have gotten in trouble if they had known it, so we had to sort of sneak around and do it. But then I went overseas, and he went to Texas and was an instructor at Fort Worth in the Air Force. So he never did get overseas, and of course that bothered him, and it didn't bother me too much because we probably wouldn't have been stationed together. But, his pride was hurt that I got to go overseas and he didn't, so. But it all worked out. It all worked out. And when I came back then, and the war had been over, and I asked if I should come back to Paris, and they sent me a telegram and said no, that they were going to restation me and ask where I wanted to go. I was going to help get the people out of the Army, that were coming home. So I wrote back and told him I wanted to go to Fort Des Moines. Fort Des Moines couldn't take me, but, what's the other town in Texas? Anyhow, I went back to Texas, and then he was only a few miles. So he used to come up to see me, or I'd go down to see him. And that's when we got married, was in Texas after the war was officially over, so. But we did get back together and get married.
Were there letters back and forth during the war?
We called, or well, wrote mostly because I couldn't call too often. But I heard from him all the time when I was overseas. And but I never did see him during that time because I didn't get home, and of course he didn't get over there. So for 4 years I didn't see him, but it was real. So we got married pretty soon after I got home.
Things like what you're talking about would be tremendous to let people know about the WAC.
Yes, not very many people know much about the WACs. About 4 years ago, the Methodist Church down the street here had a program about the Army, and they asked me to come, but it was different parts of the Army. A lot of men from different services talked about it, and they were much more interested in that, of course, than they were in mine. But I did tell them a little bit about, where I had been and what the WAC Corps did, but we didn't get into anything very personal.
What was the reaction of your family and your friends when you told them you were joining the Army?
Well, most of them thought I was crazy, of course. My dad did not really object. He said, if you think that's what you'd like to do, you go right ahead. You've got my blessing. I have 2 brothers, both younger than I, and they were too young to go. And of course, they were both envious that I was getting to go. They did go in later. One of them did. But some of the women around my age were sort of envious. They think, oh, that sounds like it would be real fun, but aren't you afraid you'll get shot, this kind of thing. And I said, no, I'm not afraid of that, because I thought we would be pretty well protected, and we were. But there were a lot of people that thought we were almost camp followers, and that I objected to. In fact, the man that I finally married told me his mother thought that we were just camp followers, having a good time. She changed her mind after I met her. I hope she did. I think she did. But there weren't as many critical people as I expected, actually, because I grew up in a real conventional, old-fashioned sort of neighborhood, and I thought that they probably would just think that was awful, that women were going out to live with all these men. And of course, most of them had no idea how it was really going to work. So they assumed things that were not ever thought about, I don't think, by anybody. Because we were never quartered close to men even. And I think the people that bossed us around were stricter than our parents were in a lot of ways, because they were so afraid that, there would be gossip of that sort. So, and some of the girls did date quite a bit, and I think I had 3 girls that got married in Paris. And it was perfectly legitimate, and as I say, they were probably more carefully supervised than they would have been at home. Because, you had bed check every night, and everybody had to be where they belonged, and I never really worried about it, for myself. And so, but I know there was a lot of gossip about it. I heard it from different people.
Do you think that the women coming out of the WACs and the women in military coming back from World War II kind of set up a lot of the movement for women's rights and gave women a chance to be more recognized?
Oh, well, I think that's true, but I think it would have happened in any case a lot, because women had to go to work for the first time ever outside the home, and I think they got a taste of being a little more independent and having their own money and doing what they wanted to. So I think it would have happened even without the women in the service, to an extent. But I think it did happen more because of us, because they found out that women could have a little more say in politics, for one thing. And yeah, I think it was very liberating for women. I was hoping that would happen when I went in, and I think it really did. It was a wonderful experience, and I've never regretted doing it. I've always been very glad that I did. And not for any big patriotic reasons, because they would have won the war without me. But I think it was just a good experience, and I think women needed to get more active. Not that I helped too much, but I think, as you mentioned earlier, I think the fact that the women were in the services made a lot of difference on women's status. We weren't second-class citizens anymore, the way we had been before then. So I'm glad that I went, and not only me, but the friends that I did have that went in.